They, in fact, are taking the supplies for themselves.
Wow, wow, what a desperate situation. Carl, we're going to have to leave it right there, but thank you very much for your reporting. We do appreciate it. Syrian rebels are waiting to see if last weekend's Israeli airstrikes will pressure President Obama into making a decision to take a more active role in Syria's civil war. For more on what's happening at the White House, Jennifer Epstein is with us in Washington, D.C. She's the White House reporter for Politico.com. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Is the silence from the White House deafening?
Well, we're at a point where the White House is being extremely cautious. They're afraid of doing anything wrong. They don't want to go down a path like the Bush administration did a decade ago in Iraq, where there was such a strong belief that there were weapons of mass destruction there that they went ahead with a war that ended up lasting a decade. This administration does not want to do that, certainly does not want to do this in Syria, where the situation seems to be getting messier, more complicated by the day. We just learned yesterday that some people even think that the chemical weapons that were used there were used by the rebels, which makes, how the U.S. or other international allies would get involved even more difficult.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, it was Carla del Ponte, I believe, that made the claim that it was the rebels that used the chemical weapons and not the Assad regime. However, she is not in total consensus and agreement with the UN. So do you think this claim is politics?
It's hard to know whether it's politics, whether it's based on some concrete piece of information that she's heard down the line. It is at the point now where the Obama administration, at least the White House yesterday, was very insistent in saying, we still feel strongly that this was in some way connected to the Assad regime, that it's the Assad regime that has the capabilities to use chemical weapons, and even if it seemed to be coming from rebels, that it wasn't actually rebels who were using these chemical weapons.
Yeah, and it certainly does play in the U.S. interest if it was the Assad regime that used those chemical weapons and not the rebels, right?
Right, exactly. The U.S. is trying to build up a case, if it does need to intervene in some way, that it is only the Assad regime that is the bad guys in the situation and not the rebels. But that's becoming increasingly more complex as we sort of get a sense that there's elements of al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups that have sort of gotten involved and are influencing the rebels and are the rebels.
Jennifer, you talked about the White House facing criticism for being slow to react. I'm wondering just how much more time does the White House have before they are really compelled, forced to make a definitive public declaration of what their plans are with regard to the civil war in Syria, which is now entering its third year. Haven't they had enough time to figure out something?
I mean, this administration has been saying for 2 years now, the Assad must go. And that has sort of been the thing that they've been firmest about. When it comes to what the next steps will be, President Obama kind of set out this red line of using chemical weapons. Then we sort of, over the weekend, had a mixed kind of set of information when the New York Times reported that using that term red line was a gaffe. And then the White House yesterday said, no, it was a intentional use of that phrase, but whether that they sort of try to redefine what red line actually means in saying that, taking action is not necessarily what would come after the use of chemical weapons, which would cross that line, but that what actually would constitute needing to take action is something else, and they haven't really explained what that would be.
And of course, muddying the waters is what if the Assad regime decides to retaliate against the alleged Israeli airstrikes? If that happens, then I don't know, all the cards are up in the air.
Yeah, we're at a point where it really does depend on who moves, who blinks again. Israel certainly, if they're said to have done these strikes over the weekend that were aimed at preventing Hezbollah from getting its own chemical weapons, and that's sort of something that Israel has made very clear. We're not okay with Hezbollah having chemical weapons, and we're going to do everything to stop it. And that's been their stance for a long time, and they just went ahead on that. There certainly seems to be anger coming from Syria, but there's not yet, been any action from the Assad's regime on whether they're going to respond in a military way, whether they have the capabilities to do so, or whether they're going to hold back and focus on their own internal fighting.
One other piece to this puzzle, and there are many pieces, of course, is Russia. John Kerry is appealing to Russia's President Vladimir Putin to withdraw their support of the Assad regime. They're on Capitol Hill at the White House. What's the optimism about his appeal to Russia in this regard?
For a long time, it really didn't seem like Russia was going to budge at all. And I think now, part of the reason why the administration has been seeking out concrete evidence on the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime is to be able to say to Russia, to be able to say to Vladimir Putin, here's the